So I often get the question, Jenny, what is the best exercise for me to do if I'm wanting to lose weight? And in reality, the answer is the exercise that you will actually do. If you don't get out there and actually exercise, that weight's going to have a hard time coming off. So we do want to choose an exercise that you will actually go out and commit to and do repeatedly day after day after day in order to be able to be physically active. But I realize that's not really the question that people are asking. What they want to really know is if I have all these different exercises to choose from, which one is a good one for actual weight loss? And specifically, the question is often followed with, I've been hearing about this high intensity interval training, and what can you tell me about it? I've heard that it burns more calories. I've heard that it burns more fat. Is this true? Well, let's first talk about why is HIIT, or this high intensity interval training, so popular these days. There's a few reasons. One, you actually spend less time exercising. Typically a session lasts only for about 30 to 40 minutes, maybe even only 20 minutes if it's extremely high intensity, instead of usually other classes in gyms you'll find are lasting for an hour or more. Also, high intensity interval training can be done without a lot of equipment. In fact, a lot of it is body weight exercises or going out and running or cycling. It also can be done anywhere. I've done sessions in the middle of a very small hotel room because I didn't have a lot of space available to me, and so you can actually do it in concentrated little small spaces. Also, a lot of people think that it tends to add a little fun element for it, especially when it's such an intensity level. Instead of going for these longer, slightly more boring, moderate activities that people do, they kind of like the fast pace of it and how everything's always changing all of the time. But that question is, does it actually burn more calories and does it actually burn more fat? To answer that question, we're going to spend a little bit of time going over some metabolism, just real basics here. First of all, we need energy in order for us to exercise. We in fact need it just to survive, but we need more of it when we start exercising. We need it for all our muscles to contract. We need it for our heart to be able to pump around all of the blood to the rest of our body. We need it for our lungs to function, for our brain to coordinate all the bodily functions that are happening, and for us to be able to actually move all of our muscles. All of that requires energy. Now we get this energy by breaking down all the food particles that we eat. Primarily we use sugars or carbohydrates and also fats. Now proteins are not something that we tend to actually create into our energy. We use those for other important things in our body to build cells up and to create hormones. However, usually it's the carbohydrates and the fats, or the sugars and the fats, that we're using to actually create energy. Now, usually it's a combination between sugars and fats, no matter what we're doing, as far as what we're utilizing for our fuel to provide us the energy for us to be able to exercise. But the ratio of how many sugars versus how many fats really depends on the intensity level of the exercise. If we're operating at higher intensity levels, we tend to utilize more carbohydrates or more sugars in order to create that energy. If we're doing lower intensity levels of exercise, we tend to utilize more fats in order to create that energy. However, as far as burning calorie goes, we actually will need more time at those lower intensity levels to be able to burn enough fat to make a difference. Versus with our sugars, we can actually burn through calories really quickly if we're at higher intensity levels. Now wait a minute, what did I just say? Because before I was saying that high intensity interval training burns more fat, but didn't I just say that it actually burns sugars? Well, let's talk about how that works. Well, when we exercise, we metabolize a large amount of sugars, and that's either any kind of exercise that we're doing. Lower, moderate intensity exercise, oxygen can then be used to help create more energy off of that. It's a very efficient system, but it's a lot slower to respond. We call this oxygen consumption, and in fact, it is a measure of your fitness status. When we first begin to exercise, or when we're exercising at higher intensities, we start to accumulate some byproducts of metabolism simply because we're not able to use this oxygen system very effectively. So then large amounts of oxygen are required at the end of exercise to convert all these byproducts back into these usable molecules. And this occurs after the exercise is already complete. And we term this going into this oxygen debt and then going back into oxygen repayment. So we call this excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And this is how we erase this debt and restore the balance within our body. So here's an example of what it looks like on the graph. So this blue part we see in the middle is when we're actually consuming oxygen. In the very beginning of exercise, so at the very start of the graph, we're looking at oxygen consumption, and that red part is showing us that we're not actually using oxygen to help facilitate these activities that we're doing, and we go into this debt or this deficit. Now, that catches up just because it takes time for that oxygen system to actually kick in and start working. And then we end up ending our exercise. At the end of that exercise, we have to repay that debt, and that's that excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. We often call it the afterburn. So after we finish exercising, we actually still continue to burn calories after we stop in order to repay all that oxygen debt that we had from when we started exercise. Now, in this graph, what we're looking at is an example of light exercise. Look at how these things change when we move to a higher intensity of exercise. So in this graph, you can see that I start exercising and I come into a huge deficit of oxygen because I am creating all of these byproducts and the oxygen system can't keep up with it. It's producing more and more byproducts. Now, what ends up happening is that I never really get to utilize that oxidative system very well, and then I end my exercise. Now, all this time after I've ended exercise, that's next several hours to even maybe day, is going to end up repaying all of that oxygen debt that we had. So that's the orange that we're seeing during that recovery time period. Now for light exercise, that might just take a half an hour, maybe a little bit more. In this high intensity exercise, this can actually last for hours and has been shown to actually occur within the body for up to 36 hours after exercise, depending on that intensity level of the exercise. Now, when we talk about this afterburn, or before the afterburn, when we're in exercise, a short exercise bout of this high intensity interval training burns approximately the same amount of calories as a longer, more moderate intensity exercise session during the exercise session. And remember, with high intensity, we're usually more burning sugars than fats, but in that moderate activity, we're burning more fats than sugars. But the calorie number is about the same. Well, when we end exercise and it's been a high intensity level of exercise, this excess post-exercise oxygen consumption time period, or this afterburn, lasts for a lot longer of a time and burns a lot more calories. And here's where the kicker is that it 100% uses fat as the fuel source to restore that balance again, instead of the combination of sugars and fats. So it is true that high intensity interval training does burn more calories and it does burn more fat by far than we're doing more lower intensity or moderate intensity exercise. However, this is all occurring after you've finished exercising, not actually during the exercise session. So the next question is, well, Jenny, how do I incorporate this into my workouts if I'm interested in actually losing weight or losing fat? Well, the traditional way is taking a Tabata class, or you can do it within your own home. It was developed by Dr. Tabata in Tokyo in around 1996, and each exercise that you do lasts for 4 minutes. You go for 20 seconds at a really high intensity level, and then you take a 10-second rest. And then you repeat that 7 more times until you've done 8 rounds completed. And that takes that 4-minute period. So for example, here in the picture, we have somebody who's doing rocket jumps where they're squatting down and then jumping up as high as they can and then going back down to the squat. They'll do this for 20 seconds, rest for 10 seconds, repeat that 7 more times, and then rest for a full minute, and then switch to a new exercise. So for instance, they might go to push-ups or to burpees or something the equivalent of that takes a lot of energy all at the same time. And then you can put that together and do about a 20-minute workout. Now, you can do this without using that Tabata ratio or those types of exercises just by doing interval training. So for instance, performing an exercise at a really high intensity, like a very vigorous exercise, for a certain amount of seconds. You want your heart rate to be at least above 85% of the maximum heart rate that your heart can do. And if you wanted to know how to calculate that maximum heart rate, you just take 220 and minus your age, and then find that percentage if you have a heart rate monitor. Then you perform that same activity, but at a more moderate intensity for another certain amount of seconds. It can be the more, or it can be same, or the same or less time than that intensity bout, the high intensity bout of exercise you did previously. But you want your heart rate to be at a lot lower of a level and operating at that more moderate intensity level. And then you just repeat that. So for example, you could run really fast for 30 seconds on a treadmill or out on the street, and then take a time jogging or maybe even walking for 30 seconds, and then repeat that several times. So the ratios, there's really no evidence that shows which is better, meaning the fast compared to the slow. So you could sprint for 60 seconds and jog or walk for 60 seconds. Or you could do a 1-to-2 ratio where you sprint for 60 seconds and then walk and jog for 120 seconds or 2 minutes. Or you could do it in the reverse order, in which you sprint for 60 seconds and then your moderate intensity level is a little bit lower than that and walk and jog for 30 seconds. It really comes more down to your personal preference and what your body can tolerate. As far as your intensity levels, your high intensity levels should be at least above 85% of your maximum heart rate. Or if you were working on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being like the highest intensity you could do, you'd want to be on a scale of 8 or more for that high intensity session. For the lower intensity session, you can be at 40 to 50% of your maximum heart rate, or on that scale of 1 to 10, you're operating more of like a 3 to 4 on that scale. And the activities that you can do basically are any activities that you want to do. It can be with running, it can be with cycling on a bike, it can be in any combination of whatever sport you like to do. So then the question is, how many times per week should I do this, Jenny? Could I do it 5 days a week? Would I be able to burn all of this fat? Well, they recommend starting with just 1 to 2 times per week. And if you're really doing high intensity interval training correctly, you really don't want to do it more than 3 times per week. Limit yourself to no more than that. If you do any more, it's going to cause injury to your body and end up overtraining, and you won't see the results that you want. Also, though, don't forget other types of exercise and in making sure to incorporate more moderate intensity levels of exercise for longer periods of time throughout the week. So running or jogging for about 45 to 60 minutes in addition to the interval training that you're doing each week. If you've got questions, ask them in the comments of the post where you found this. I would love to be able to answer them, and good luck on your journey.